We don't make risky decisions for Jesus if we don't trust Jesus, and we'll never trust Jesus if we're not intimate with him first. I'm reading Brennan Manning's book, The Signature of Jesus, right now, and he says that Jesus invites you to trust him this big before he invites you to trust him this big, and then he trusts you this big before he does this big. And Carol and I have made, prior to Disciples Made, three major career moves that were fiscally irresponsible, apart from being the clear leading of Jesus. Won't go into what all those are, but it's crazy at 52 with two kids in college and one about to go into college to leave your highest paying, most high profile job you've ever had to start something new. Like, that's dumb unless Jesus asks you to do it.
Welcome to another episode of the Visionary Discipleship Podcast. My name is Adam Ehrlichman, your host. So excited to be bringing to you guys another phenomenal guest with us in an episode here. We do not seek to answer all your questions when we bring you on and you guys tune in to listen to this podcast, but we seek to spark, start, and just spur on some good thought trail for you to go down some pathways that maybe you hadn't before and hadn't considered, hadn't thought, get you asking some questions that you should be and haven't before. And so I am very, very excited. We have worked long and hard to get this podcast on the calendar, Brian. We have tried again and again and rescheduled. And, thankfully, here we are today. But Brian, how are you doing today?
Doing all right. Excited to be here. Excited about talking about this conversation. This is the stuff that I eat, sleep, drink. It's the center of my life. So it's fun to have the conversation. Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. If you cut Brian open, he bleeds out discipleship. And so that's why we've got him on the podcast today. Let me tell you a little bit about Brian so you know some of him and just his background and where he's coming from. And I'll let him kind of fill in the cracks as well here after I just kind of tell you guys a bit about what I do know of him. So he is the founder and visionary of Disciples Made, a nonprofit ministry that provides online courses and coaching and mobilizes everyday followers of Jesus to join him in bringing heaven to earth, which just that line alone, we could stop the podcast there and I'd be like, that was enough for my soul.
That was the first thing Jesus asked for in the Lord's Prayer, or teaches us to ask for, is your kingdom come, your will be done. Not someday when we die and get to heaven, but right here on earth.
Amen.
So,
yes.
Yep.
Right. Exactly. So
there's vision for you.
That alone. But we're going to continue just for your sake, listeners. Our souls are full, but yeah, we'll do it for you guys. Okay. We'll be selfless. So, Disciples Made, they do this by helping develop a spirit-led outcomes of character and calling, which lead to the fully alive life Jesus speaks of in John 10:10. That's what their online course is. And I've gone through myself, right? I have experienced that, and the experiences and the courses you guys put on, it is so good. So, I've seen men just go from seat to service, some from seat to save to service, and totally just transform through the courses and the experiences that you guys have provided. So Disciples Made, a little bit more here. It hosts the Fully Alive online community found in the Fully Alive app that you can download. Before, Brian, you were at Disciples Made. You were a pastor for 25 years. He was serving most recently for 9 years as the Next Steps pastor at Westside Family Church in Kansas City, Kansas. Previously, he was planting a church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He received his BA in religion from the University of South Carolina and a master's divinity and MA in counseling from Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando, Florida. Brian and his wife Carol were married in 1994. And they have 3 grown children, Hannah, Sam, and Caleb.
30 years ago, baby. 30 years this year.
Congratulations. That's huge. That's
yeah, to me, not her, poor thing.
Well, we'll say a prayer for her before listeners, say a prayer for Carol before we get off. So Brian, go ahead and fill in some of the cracks. This is a little bit about you, but help our listeners just get to know you a bit better.
Sure. 3 adult kids, got 2 grandkids now. and we're loving that. We're just getting to that season of life where our youngest is about to graduate college in a year. Then he'll go on to med school. So we're really, really proud of him. I've never seen a kid in high school be so excited about how certain elements can move through cell membranes and others can't. Like he's just been tripped out on this stuff forever. So I just get fascinated listening to him talk. It's just fun. It's fun raising kids, seeing their giftedness come out. So there's that piece. The disciples made, you might get to a question like this, but it was at Westside Family Church, a large church here in Kansas City, where the disciples made stuff was born. All I set out to do was multiply disciples, not start a ministry. We just started multiplying disciples, and the beauty of that was so powerful that just became the fixation of my attention. And the end result of that is, well, go do something about it. So that's how those are related. I didn't know if we were going there, but that fills in the cracks basically of just the storyline.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of what I love in our prior conversations that we've had, Brian, is you talk about multiplying. Um, you talk about multiplying people, right, and disciples more so than programs. And I love the distinction that you make when we have those conversations. And so we're going to talk more. I'm going to ask you in a minute a bit more about
Good.
disciples made and how that got started, and what all that looks like. Just
Okay.
for our audience to kind of have more background knowledge, so I'm not making any assumptions because I'm very familiar with it, right? But before we
Sure.
do that, I would really like to just kind of define some terms just to help our audience connect even better. How do you define discipleship, and why is that important?
Wow. We could spend the entire time on this question. I define a disciple as a person who is partnering with the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, to develop, to restore their God given identity. Like we're given an identity in Christ when we're saved, we're given Jesus' identity. But we realize that over time through a process that theologians call sanctification, what we call disciple making. I see them as exactly the same thing. But what does that look like? And is that measurable? And I believe that it is. And the measurements that we look for are what kind of impact is the Spirit having on your character? And the double click question to that is, are you developing the fruit of the Spirit that are all characteristics of Jesus? So Galatians 5 talks about, love and how that's expressed in joy, peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness, and gentleness. And so we define a disciple as someone who is growing the fruit of the Spirit, cultivating the fruit of the Spirit in their life by dependence upon the Spirit through abiding with Jesus. And the other part of that is you're also identifying and developing the gifts of the Spirit. Notice the of the Spirit on both of those. If it's the third person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, who applies salvation, we might want to ask, how does he change people? And he cultivates fruit, he deposits gifts. We have just simply decided to focus on those two things, develop those things. You will have a mobilized disciple. And so that's what it is for us. And so why is that important? One, because it provides a long lost problem in the churches that I've at least been a part of, and the ones that I've coached across the country. There's very few that want to really get down to a measurable definition of disciple making. We can ask why that's the case, but one, we're providing a measurable definition is one reason it's important, but the more important reason and the more motivating reason is it's actually an inspiring vision for an individual's life. The more loving I am, the more joyful I am, the more at peace I am, the more patient I am, the more intimate my relationships become at home with my spouse, my kids, my work, the people that I work with, the people that I engage in, fun activities. And the more I develop my calling, the more influence I have. Like the two questions that haunt me more than any other are, will I really be able to love and be loved? And will my life make a difference? And if you're partnering with the Spirit to develop character and calling, the answer to those two will be a resounding yes. So it's incredibly
Mm,
important.
that's so good. And you talk about character, and you talk about calling, and some of the phrases that I've heard you use are intimacy preceding influence. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just share, because I think that really
Right.
relates to exactly just the definition and the importance, and right, that intimacy before influence or precedes influence, right?
Well, I think I would reframe that just a little bit, Adam. It's almost there's a lot of people that say you should develop character before calling. What I have found, and I get why that's important. It's like I don't want somebody influencing the world out of a poor character. We've seen a lot of the ramifications of that. So the warning is important strategically when it comes to actually equipping someone in a disciple making relationship is I would develop them both at the same time because they have a mutually ratcheting influence on one another. They inspire each other and they open up the power of heaven as they work in tandem. So that's the reason I say character times calling equals impact. If you that's really our theology statement on disciple making. If you want to see an impact, develop character and calling simultaneously from the very beginning. And again, we can unpack some of that as we go. Intimacy and influence are two things. It's the product of developing character and calling. Okay. So that's kind of what I've already
Right.
unpacked a little bit of. But intimacy and influence is also the two ways that we represent being made in the image of God.
Mm,
And I paused there because that is so profoundly important. Um, God says, create mankind, a man and woman, in our image. Well, what is that image? It's not a picture because we don't have a picture of God. We have a picture of Jesus, but it's not the blue-haired, blonde-eyed Jesus that I grew up with a
yeah.
picture in church. But what is the image? Well, God's a loving God. We get that name. We know that there is a loving intimacy between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit because you hear Jesus talk about that in John chapter 17 or whatnot. But he's also a creative God. He's a God of beauty and restoration and wholeness and all these other things. And as we develop intimacy and influence, we actually develop and more fully realize the image of God in our lives. And it's no wonder, I know I'm saying a lot here, but it's no wonder that when Adam and Eve were first created, the creation mandate was be fruitful and multiply, because that requires what? Intimacy, and have dominion, which requires what? Influence. The first two mandates he gave us were to actually live out the image that we've been created in, and developing character and calling actually helps us get
That's
there.
a connection I haven't made prior. That's really, re- yeah, that's huge.
Huge.
And I can't help but think that the intimacy that you've experienced and the calling that you've stepped into and then in one season, right, stepped out to into disciples made, that a lot of the intimacy that has been cultivated between you and the Lord has driven you really starting this ministry.
Mm.
And I'm maybe I'm making an assumption, but I think I'm probably right. So, man, could you tell us more about how did Disciples Made get started, and what kind of birthed that out of your heart to go, we need to do this ministry?
Yeah. Gosh, I love the way you said that because it helped me see something that I had seen, but from a different angle. And that just shed some beautiful light on it. We don't make risky decisions for Jesus if we don't trust Jesus, and we'll never trust Jesus if we're not intimate with him first. Um, I'm reading Brennan Manning's book, The Signature of Jesus, right now, and he says something in there that I've read in a couple of different places, probably Dallas Willard or whatnot, but it says that Jesus invites you to trust him this big before he invites you to trust him this big. And then he trusts you this big before he does this big. And Carol and I have made, prior to Disciples Made, with Disciples Made, three major career moves that were fiscally irresponsible, apart from being the clear leading of Jesus. Won't go into what all those are, but it's crazy at 52 with with two kids in college and one about to go into college to leave your highest paying, most high profile job you've ever had, to start something new. Like that's dumb unless Jesus asks you to do it.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about that is, it was a moment in my second year at Westside Family Church. Bless you. That was my second year at Westside Family Church, where Jesus, in a very intimate moment, said, Brian, And so this is, I actually got to develop Disciples Made, not as a business, but as a ministry. The skunk works of it happened in church. So it's, a lot of this was proven even in other churches by the time I stepped out to do it full time. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm just, some type of super fool or super Christian or whatever. Um, but it so but we had just launched a campaign. I know you talk about small groups a lot in the ministry that you're a part of, and we had just nailed it. We were following Steve Gladen's model, the hybrid activate model of Nelson Searcy, with remnants of the Bill Willits stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were using all the things, and we did a campaign in the fall of 2010 at Westside that I wrote, and we doubled our groups. We went from about 120 groups to about 240, added about 1,000 people to groups that weren't in groups before. And I'm feeling really good. Like, Adam, bring me on your podcast. We just nailed it. And that's kind of how I was feeling. I was very excited about that. And I'm on my way home from the first group, and the presence of Jesus in my car was so palpable. I had to pull over and just sit. And the message that I got was, I know you're excited and feeling satisfied with what you've done, but I need to let you know, Brian, that this is not the business that I'm in. And it's not the business that I've called you to. I've actually brought you to Westside to figure out multiplication and die on that hill.
Mm.
And that's when I had to admit, I didn't know how to do it. That was my best effort. I just figured if you add a lot, you're multiplying.
Sure.
And it's a very, very different game that I discovered over time. But it started with I don't know how, pedaling as fast and as hard and as smart as I can. And if I'm not doing it, I don't know how.
I find that, yeah,
That's
I
how it
find that
started.
so interesting and intriguing, because even people that we'll have on the Bill Groups podcast, right? They are oftentimes, they're people who are leading large small group ministries. And by most standards, others would look in and go, wow, they have a very, very successful disciple making ministry, just maybe wouldn't articulate that way. They would assume it just because, hey, they have so many people in groups. And what your experience is, hey, we were crushing growing group. There are a few people, there's maybe, I can count maybe less than 5 people on my hand who experienced the type of small group ministry growth that you just expressed and experienced. And for you to say, I don't know that we're accomplishing the Great Commission, is a crucial question for someone to ask, is, are we seeing disciples made and multiplied in ways that we go, yeah, this was God, right? This is the Lord working. So that's, yeah, no, wow. So man, can expand a little bit more. So with Disciples Made, right? That's kind of where it was birthed. Is birthed out of that experience for you and that intimacy. And I often have told younger guys on staff that the Lord will often precede a new calling of season with some discontentment in your current season. That there's
Totally.
discontentment you're feeling right now in your current, because He's maybe preparing you for the next thing. And so it seems like that may have been some of that of He was preparing you for that next thing and calling you to something that was different, and it turned out that's Disciples Made. So what do you guys do in Disciples Made to help see that multiplicative ministry in people, in disciples, go forward in a meaningful way? What at the nuts and bolts practical, what are you guys doing?
Well, it'd be helpful if I could actually back up and reframe a couple of things that you just said, because I don't want someone to think that I believe that small groups isn't discipleship. That's not what Jesus told me that night. He just said, that's not the extent of discipleship. That's not what I called you here to do. A lot of people are figuring that out, maybe not to that extent. And I'm not asking you to throw that away. In fact, what he specifically said is, shelve everything you think you know about disciple making. Don't throw it away. Just shelve it, because I want to have enough of a blank slate in your mind to where I can write a new story that will sync up with that one at some point. So I kept doing my day job. Like, I kept being the best small groups leader I could be. Yeah. Right. I mean, this is year 1 of 9. So there's still 8 years to go. But we're going to develop this little thing called obedience to Jesus, however He tells us to do that. And we're going to do it at 5:30 in the morning. So, And God did not give me a heart to create something else. I wanted to be a pastor in a local congregation for the rest of my life. And I thought that would be the case all the way up until the last couple of years at Westside, when there became a difference of opinion in the leadership team about what is the nature of disciple making. So this conversation is critical because it can there's not agreement on it, and I felt that very tangible at Westside. In the first number of years, I had the privilege of having a lead teaching pastor that saw what we were doing, felt the leadership of Jesus in it, and supported it. And if you've got that support, and if it's not taking resources away from what the fuller body of the leadership team sees as the most important, you're in good shape. But as soon as it starts to compete, potentially with the overall direction of the church, then you've got bigger decisions to make. So it was more of a painful process to discern, which direction would I choose when I wanted the two to be the same. So I wanted to clear up a couple of those things. I very much believe small groups can be a major part of a disciple making process, but they can't complete it without a measure of intentionality. You can get people connected in community. You can get people connected around certain habits. You can't necessarily measure what's happening in those small groups unless you have and small group leaders will understand this, unless you have forced the people to give a report by literally going to their door.
Yeah.
You can't measure what's happening in there. You just know whether or not the leaders are actually saying that they hold an event called a small group meeting. So I just wanted to clear those two things up. Disciples made when Westside was going through a leadership transition, it was obvious that they were going to prioritize more the seating capacity than the sending capacity. And it's not like they don't care about sending. They do. The ministries that Westside does are amazing to this day. Still very proud of what they're doing. But as far as the mobilization of disciples, that's where there was a difference of opinion. And I just felt God saying, start this thing. And so that's
a very helpful distinction for our audience to distinguish there, because there's a range, there's a scale of discipleship of infant to child to young adult, youth, and adult, or then grandparent, and
yeah.
in many ways,
yeah,
I mean, you guys use small groups to facilitate a lot of what you're doing in Disciples Made. It just happens to
absolutely
be much, much more intentional than what you see with kind of like your mainstream type of small groups in churches.
Yeah.
And
that's how we coach church leaders, leverage it, find out who to disciple by how far they go in your assimilation process, worship, connect, serve, whatever your discipleship process is. The further people move down the assimilation process, those are the ones that I would leverage to disciple into an influence or spiritual influencer. And so it works beautifully if you're intentional with it.
Certainly. Yeah. Those mile markers get moving down the road, those heads popping up going, yeah, that's someone who's hungry. That's someone who's teachable. That's someone who's ready to get more, right?
And they've demonstrated it, not signed up for it from a cattle call invitation. Yes. They've demonstrated it with their life.
Yeah, exactly.
Work with the momentum.
So go ahead and continue into that a bit more with Disciples Made. What are you all doing through that ministry to help be more intentional, to move that discipleship process forward in a way that maybe some other things can't?
Yeah. Well, it starts with the name. We are making disciples that are made. And before you think, oh, that guy just said nothing. The difference that I discovered is the small groups that we were leading were creating disciples that remained in perpetual disciple making state. All right. We didn't disciple them to the point where they would no longer need us. Now, if you back up and ask the question, how did Jesus lead his disciples? He led his disciples in a way where he could go back to the Father in a couple years. So he had some endpoints in mind. And those endpoints weren't, did you read this book and pass the test? It was, are you able to reproduce what I did in you with others? And they demonstrated it prior to him leaving. If you recall, it was probably the 3 that they started with, and then the 3 influenced the 12. The 12 were then divided into twos to go out to all these different places and came back with the 72, right? So they're already demonstrating a proven process, a proven acumen of reproduction before he goes back. So we are discipling people in a way that they can become made, meaning they can reproduce others. Like, for instance, the metaphor that popped for me early was, God led me to answer the question, when is your son a man? Well, it's not when he's 18, because I know a lot of older than 18 people, males that are not men. They act like boys, right? And I don't act like a boy, on regular occasions. But, when is he a man? When he's able to produce his own family, or I'm his friend and not necessary. I don't want to raise my kids. I want to love them. I want them to love me and want to be with Papa. But there's a big difference. And when you take that illustration and turn it into the church, it's like, it seems as if we just want to keep building bigger and bigger basements so that we can have more and more children, not teach our children to have their own children. Right. And so that's one thing that we're doing. We are clearly defining disciple making, which I've already shared with you. Character times calling equals impact. We offer measurable transformation. We have a tool called the MyImpact Equation, where you actually measure your character and calling and determine a next step to continue to grow in both. So measurable transformation. You already mentioned that we have an app that has a bunch of courses and cohorts in it. In those courses and cohorts, the way we design those is not that you interface with a video, take notes, and you're smarter, watch next video. We have this digital yet personal dynamic. All in order to scale, we've put all of our resources in an app, but it's not the app that you interface with. It's other people in a cohort setting or a little triad type of setting that you engage in around these things, because it's the intersection of life and people as you process these things that actually help you become that disciple that is made. And so those are two of the distinctions that we have there.
Yeah, so I've been through the Disciples Made course. So you have had the cohort. I've been through the Leaders Made, and it's just that one's a little bit long. Can you talk a little bit about just the different ones that you do offer as far as those experiences and those cohorts, and a little bit just maybe length and what they entail? So just for our audience to know, okay, hey, that's what that is.
Yeah, sure. If I backed up the scope before honing in on those, I would say we see the disciple making process as really 3 phases. And I just take this as well as I can from the way Jesus did it. When Jesus first started the relationship with his disciples, it was a come and see. Peter didn't know Jesus from Adam, which is a funny word because Jesus is the second Adam and you're Adam. And so
I'm the third Adam. I tell people I'm not as bad as the first, not as good as the second. Somewhere in between is the third.
Hey, solid theology. Anyway, so Peter didn't know him, and he said, "Come and see." And I think, and we've created experiences that people like yourself can use with their friends to help them come and see Jesus. And that's in our what we call the Explore section, or the Explore courses of the Fully Alive app. And then there's the second phase of Develop, which is once you know that Jesus is the Messiah, you start to take up your cross and follow him. It means, okay, I've got to start dying to my perception of what life is supposed to be and what I deserve, and start living for Christ. And that's a daily, repent and believe. That's a process forever. We call that the Develop phase. And we've got a few courses in there to help you start to develop character and calling. But the third phase, come and see, take up your cross and follow. The third phase is feed my sheep. How do I get you to the place? What are the courses or cohorts you need to go through so that when you're done with them, you're more feeding sheep than you are being fed? And we call that the influence phase. So I'll use the language influence level cohorts to describe what you're talking about. And this is really where we got our start, because Westside was good at helping people come to faith. Westside was really good at getting people into small groups and starting that discipleship track, but we had nothing, and most churches have absolutely nothing apart from elder training or become a church planter in trying to develop spiritual influencers. And I believe that's an all skate, not a few skate. That's an all skate situation, 100% of the followers of Jesus. So we created this thing called Followers Made, which is a 6-month cohort that is an exclusive invitation. You get invited through a prayerful, spirit-led process. You go to an information huddle to hear what all's involved in the commitment, the value you'll get as you keep that commitment, and then you enter into a covenant relationship with that leader if you want to do it. So the idea is to stack that with, 8 to 12, maybe a little, maybe fewer. I wouldn't go too many more. And you go through the cohort that's all facilitated in the app, and you'll be reading a chapter or two of a book. You'll be engaging in Bible reading and journaling and accountability with prayer. You're developing several spiritual habits that actually foster character and calling. And over a 6-month period, we've seen people literally go, I think you went from, seat to serve, or what was the phrase you
I
used?
said
I loved
seat
it.
to save to serve to share is the ones I'll throw out there every now and then.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, they would go from seat to serve and share. Like they're mobilized. They see themselves as a partner in the development of a partner in the Great Commission, not somebody who helps the church accomplish the Great Commission, because they are the church. It's a major transformation that happens in those 6 months. We've got 3 other influence level cohorts in there. You mentioned Leaders Made. I don't know where you want me to go from here.
Well, I wanted just our audience to get an idea of the scope of what you guys are doing. And because some are, it's like, hey, here's our one thing, and this is a one size fits all. And what you guys, it is not a one size fits all. You have multiple stages and phases that they can go through, and multiple experiences and courses that they can take in that meet someone where they are in that process in their spiritual journey. And I felt it'd be really helpful just for people to get to hear that, because essentially what you're trying to do, you're trying to help disciples become self-feeding, self-leading, and then self-reproducing. And the line that you said earlier that I just, and maybe it's just because I'm millennial, I just thought that was so good. You're talking about getting disciples out of their parents' basements and out into the world to, I just was like, that is so good. Get them off those spiritual video games and out of the basement and into the real world to, be autonomous and spirit-led. And yeah, it was good.
I mean, I get it. I'm not boomer, but I'm not millennial at all. I think I'm X, right in the middle, or whatever that is. But I know the temptation to sit and binge watch Netflix, which is probably a similar, adrenaline rush or whatever chemical things going off as playing video games and things like that. So I get that temptation, but a piece of your soul dies when you're engaged in that, because you're really allowing your brain to be moved by someone else and something else, or adrenaline. And being engaged in the mission of God is what you were created for. It's what gives you that hunger for that dopamine hit. But the real hit comes when you're partnering with God to make the world a better place. And so, yeah, I could go on and on.
Amen.
We also, Adam, have coaching for helping people optimize those tools. That's all built in. Some of it's stuff that you can engage with a video, or you can do with other people. But bigger than that, we help you understand the framework behind why these things work, so that you can apply these frameworks to anything and everything you do. So contextualization is 100% possible. If you're thinking, I want to make my small groups better, but I don't really know how to do that. Well, the intentional disciple making environment framework that we've established, you can apply that. We've got tools to help you assess any small group environment based upon that, and how to take a next step toward it. So it is a very large, I call it an ecosystem. We are an ecosystem of disciple making, all wrapped up in an app.
That you guys are. Absolutely. Trying to help move people from the spiritual basement of their parents' house into the real world, and living out, being fully alive the way Jesus meant, like you said in John 10:10. And so let's go this direction. Brian, what are some weak spots? And you've hit on a few, or mentioned a few, very respectfully so, right? Very respectfully so.
Hope so. It's fruit of the spirit, by
Right.
the way. Loving,
Right. Live
joyful,
in
patient.
harmony, right, with one another. Do not provoke one another.
Mhm.
So, yeah, absolutely. What
Right?
what are some weak spots of discipleship in the church today that you see? And then, after that, and if you want to, you might in the same sentence or paragraph there just say, "Hey, I think that but this is something that the church is strong at in discipleship today." And so, yeah, what are some weak spots that you see?
The one I've already mentioned is probably the most glaring to me because everything will flow down from it. And that is lack of a very clear and reproducible definition of what a disciple is. We ask people, what is a disciple? What's your definition of a disciple? And it either don't have one, they can't agree upon one, or it's, a full paragraph of 50 words. And that's not reproducible. It's not, you can't share it. You can't. And so I just think the most important thing that can be done that for whatever reason seems to be the elusive thing we can't get to. And what is that Lucy thing? The cartoon where I can't hit the arrow, I can't hit the bullseye with the arrow. So I'm just going to shoot the arrow against the barn. Then I'm going to go draw a circle around it. That seems to be the strategy of what we do. The problem is we potentially miss out on God's true objectives in a person's life through the influence of the Spirit. So I start there and keep moving until the arrow hits the middle of that thing. So that's one of the biggest glaring gaps. The second biggest glaring gap I've also mentioned, that is churches are mistaking an assimilation process for a disciple making process. And again, we don't poo-poo. We don't try to say get rid of the assimilation. We think assimilation's brilliant. You should do that. If you're not doing that, there's a reason you're not growing. Like, get better at that. And there's a ton of books that can do that way better than us. All we say is, be great at that, but leverage that to identify who you disciple, because through that process, people are raising their hands and saying, I'm in or all in or mostly in. And I can take that momentum and that work that God's already doing in their life and disciple them into spiritual influencers that will help them start to be, sail out. So those are the two biggest gaps. I think if we fix those, we'd fix a lot. What are churches doing right? They're able to gather these people. I'm a fisherman. I love to fish. I used to have a boat. One day I hope to again. But if, when I would go out on the lake, I wouldn't know where the fish are pooled up. I would know where they were last time I caught. But churches have a way of taking and this is a kind of a metaphor. It just breaks down because people aren't fish, obviously. But on a
Jesus
Sunday
used it. You're good.
morning,
Yeah, you're good. He called them fish.
that's fair. That's fair. On a Sunday morning, 5,000 of the local neighborhood, which is over 100,000, come into one spot and you have their attention for an hour. If you can do that, that's fabulous. It's not the end zone.
Mm.
That's the problem. We make that the end zone, and then that's when we've failed when we really did the hardest part, right? That's a hard part of it, but it's so I think they're doing that well. Now it's how do we leverage that to get the bigger
Yeah,
work
it's a
done?
first down, but it's not a touchdown.
So,
Right.
yeah, or like getting your first
Yeah.
down and saying, okay, we'll hand the ball over. We're not in the end zone yet, but
We
we'll just
made a
hand the ball
50-yard
over.
bomb pass, and then we fumbled at the 25-yard line, right? For
Yeah. And Patrick Mahomes, sorry, unless if you're a Dallas fan or whoever you're a
Patriots, we
fan
we have a
of,
good track
Texans,
record with
whatever.
Mahomes. We like Mahomes, so it's okay.
You go. Mahomes is going to break his ankle to get into the end zone, and I think we should too. We just have to define it, right?
Yes. Yes, certainly. And I think it's really important, right? Because I run into a lot of churches too through what we do and the consulting and stuff that we work with. And, we do a lot of groups, discipleship, solving the volunteer crisis, not so much discipleship pathway, but in the ones that I have run into and we do talk with about, it's like you said, they will mistake the assimilation process as the discipleship. And it's, guys, assimilation was just to create the foundation for you to build a house on top of this living fully alive. Not, hey, we laid a foundation and now the work's done. It's like, dude, you haven't framed the house. You haven't put a roof on. You haven't moved furniture in. You don't have the family in there. Like, that's not. Those are two very distinctly different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Stanley popularized the assimilation process, his whole foyer living room kitchen analogy is brilliant. The foyer Sunday morning, that's where you meet people on the front porch. The people that you want to invite in a little closer into your life, you invite them into the living room and sit. A more formal area, we don't have our guard let down. We've brushed our teeth by the time we get somebody into the living room. But there's people in your life that come to the kitchen. They can come through the garage. They can come through the back door. Your hair might be messed up. But I mean, there's a more levels of intimacy. And it's basically, assimilations usually fit that. Worship, connect in a small group, serve on a volunteer team. We call that disciple making. It's not disciple making. There's discipleship happening. Discipleship can happen in the relationships that are in all those environments, but literally all they are environments that show someone's initiative to either make friends or serve the church that's meant something to them. And those are extremely valuable, but they're not necessarily developing
Right.
character.
They create opportunities to do that, but they are not the plan or the process or the steps or the phases to see someone spiritually formed into the image of Christ.
Yeah. Look for those phases in the Gospels and send me a text when you see them, and I'll start to better validate them as discipleship.
Yes. So the title of this podcast, Brian, is the Visionary Discipleship. I almost, tripped up on saying the title of our own podcast. How am I going to do that right? I just thought, man, I'm not even going to stumble for it. I'm just going to full out transparent, just own that just happened. So the title of this podcast is Visionary Discipleship. How can church leaders, or maybe even nonprofit leaders in the space that you're in now, how can they be more visionary in their approach to discipleship? Not defensive, not sitting in the, kind of the back seat of the church, but being in the front row, front lines of seeing spiritual formation happen.
I got two answers to that. The first answer to that is, well, actually, I'm going to give you the first one, explain the second one, come back to the first one, because I just don't want to forget either one of them. The first one, the way to be a visionary disciple maker is just to start developing character and calling, because that will create stories in the lives of people that will win the next generation and the next generation. So if you want to be a visionary, just be proactive in doing the right thing instead of critiquing what you believe is the wrong thing. Like, what good is that? Not much. It'll wake other leaders up perhaps to see a better way over time, but that depends on kind of how you do it. But if you really want to be a visionary leader, I didn't set out. I mean, when God said you're not doing the way I wanted you to do it, he didn't give me this big, long ecosystem of language and structure and all this other stuff. He said, go identify 5 guys from the 2 groups that you're currently leading, invite them to lead their own small group and disciple them for a year in the process. That's all he said. And everything else has come from that. So I would say, you want to become a visionary leader? If you perceive that I'm a visionary leader, then I got my start by just obeying what Jesus told me to do. And I would not have gotten here without that. I would have read more books from other people that saw themselves as visionary leaders and try to run their. So that's kind of step one. And if you ignore that one, that would really cost you, because Jesus is way smarter than I am, way smarter than you are. And if he's got a plan for your life, I would want that plan over any other. All right. So that's the first one. The second one is, like, if you want to be a visionary leader, if I could go back to answer this for me 20 years ago, here's what I'd say. And Adam, I really appreciate this question. I would say, stop thinking that a visionary leader equals Andy Stanley or Bill Hybels or whoever. And stop thinking that visionary leadership actually comes from you going off into a mountain location somewhere, burning incense, reading whatever and praying and getting some grand vision of what happens. Like that perception of what a visionary leader is disqualified me from actually seeing that seeing vision, that I actually might have a vision capacity, right? The perceived definition I had was actually making me self reject that I had that possibility. Um, I have discovered the majority of the vision that I see. So my title is visionary for Leaders Made, and what that, or for Disciples Made, and what that means is I'm in the going, I'm moving, and I can see what's next. Why? Not because I'm smart, but because God actually will be the light into your feet and the lamp into your path as you're moving. And so it's so fun. Like when I stepped out and started this, I knew that there was a lot of things I had to create. Well, what was the map? What was the top of the box cover? Well, I knew enough. I could see enough to know where I needed to go next. And I just continue to have that. How do we continue to advance and innovate and pioneer this thing into the future? Well, I can just see it. Well, what can you see? Well, more than I could last year. And so, visionary leadership to me is just being faithful with what you're given and allowing God to illuminate the path in front of you.
Wow. Yeah. How often are people so concerned with God's unrevealed will for their life? Looking ahead, what is the vision that you have for my life unrevealed at this moment, as opposed to what are the small parts that he has revealed and you step that's exactly what I just heard you say of be faithful to do
Yeah.
exactly what God has revealed for you to do today. Take those, and the vision can get bigger and larger, and you see more as you get further down the road. But yeah, it's, man, we got to get the bus moving, because you ever tried steering a parked bus? It doesn't really go that well.
Doesn't go anywhere. If you're interested, I've got an illustration from one of the key transition moments in all this to help illustrate what that vision looks like. Are we running out of time, or you think that'd be
More than
valuable for this
valuable. We will
conversation?
extend the time. Yes, please share that illustration with us. That's yeah.
Okay, cool. Because some people think a vision is going to be this grand picture or whatnot. Oftentimes, for me, it's been very small, commonplace pictures that I can understand. So I mentioned that when I was at Westside, there was a growing kind of tension on the leadership team about, what kind of church will we be? And it's for simplicity's sake. Some prioritize the seating capacity, some prioritize the sending capacity. I was obviously on the sending capacity side, and we were in a process of changing the lead teaching pastor role. And I knew enough about the people that we were recruiting, and I knew that the majority of the people on our team were more concerned about in building up the seating side of this thing with this transition. And so obviously, and I was recruited by the lead teaching pastor that was about to step out. So when you look at large churches of 5,000 whatever, and you've got that philosophical change and you're the guy that got brought in, you just know that transitions like that typically involve an exit for yourself. I was hoping that wasn't the case. So when we could get all on a closer page and move forward with all of it working together. But I remember it was at that time that several churches started to invite me to come do what I was doing at Westside there, and it would be closer to my wife's family at the time and things like that. And I'm like, man, I love it here. I don't want to move. Kids are established. I really don't want to go. I've got disciples made here and so many things happening with microchurch movement that have come out of this. Like the Kansas City Underground came out of the disciple making movement there at Westside largely, at least the genesis of it. Um, and so I just kept asking God, what do I do with this? What do I do? I don't know. Do I entertain these other jobs? Do I stay here? And it was so beautiful. The picture that came, there's the visionary element. The picture is like, Brian, you're going down a highway and it's a 1-lane highway, and your one lane is west side. And there's a shoulder over here off of the highway that, you could run into if you needed to or whatnot. Right now, Disciples Made is the shoulder. What you need to do over the next year is to make sure that the shoulder becomes a lane that you could merge into if you need to. And, that was 18 months prior to the transition when it actually happened. But it was at that point where it was like, okay, well, this needs to become a not-for-profit. We need to start having conversations with the people that are involved that this may be a part of the future. And that image right there is a vision. I mean, image and vision. It's just a picture, and it's simple. creating a lane out of a shoulder, right? You don't have to choose. Just make one more possible to navigate in. And so one of the things that we say here at Disciples Made is that obedience is better than competence. Obedience is greater than competence. All I did was obey that vision, and more vision came. So hope that's helpful to folks. It's so ordinary and plain, but so clear and powerful. So
Very, very. And I mean, I even related to that illustration of taking a shoulder and turning it into a lane of the everyday Jesus follower who's like, I don't have time. I got so much work. I don't have time to be a part of a group. I don't have time to do this or making decide. And it's, well, maybe that shoulder for him or her is you start a Bible study or group at your workplace, or you begin one of these experiences and you
yeah,
use the Disciples Made course curriculum to help you start a group in your workplace, and that
yeah,
becomes your lane. And that's the vision.
yeah. 10 people going through a Missionaries Made takes 4 months. You walk out of that knowing how to be a very intentional, strategic, and not weird,
Key, yeah.
a missionary where you
I
live
got
and
called
working
into
on the plant.
HR
Yeah.
because I was being weird again. Brian, what? No, no.
Yeah. We just need to do a little bit of unweird. Let's figure out how to work within the system. And it's so fun. The blessed rhythms are what we use in Missionaries Made. To begin in prayer, listen, eat, serve, share is way down the
Yes,
process.
yes, man, that's phenomenal. So, hey, last question. We'll wrap this up. We're coming up on time, and maybe 2 minutes or less. What is one of the best discipleship
Okay.
stories you can share of witnessing a person's life transformed that you've either gotten to be a part of personally or you've gotten to witness through your ministry? What is a story of life transformation? Because that's really what all this is about, what it comes down to, everything we're discussing.
Sure.
What's that story for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of these stories, but I'll go back to the very beginning. The first one where I realized the power of what we were doing, particularly in developing calling. A guy named Andy Traub. He was in my he was in that very first Disciples Made group, and I was asking him all of them, step up, lead your own group. And I thought he would be the best one. He was actually the least effective, probably, of all of the small group leaders that stepped up to start their own group. But what he was capable of was, as a mid-level manager at AMC theaters, uh, in charge of HR. Speaking of HR, he was tasked by his VP to actually create processes for the hiring of folks on the autism scale, which is the broader categories. How do you start creating hiring processes, HR processes for hiring folks with disabilities? And he had no passion for it. Had no, all he had was, this is on your task list. And when he's in our Leaders Made, he's reading scripture and he's journaling. And he has one of these spirit fire up moments where the spirit uses the be a voice for the voiceless and you speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. He felt a personal calling, lightning bolt moment, which is really unusual, but very powerful, to not only um, engage that task, but to make it his personal calling. So God took that commitment of his and infused it. He got the actual processes done and to market within 6 months. Had their first hire within 6 months. And then he's out serving Home Depot and Starbucks and the governments around the world on this process that he developed under God's leadership. So that's
Wow.
I could have said, "Hey, Andy, bag that, be a better small group leader." Or he could go out and have influence where 50,000 people with disabilities are now, gainfully employed, love it. And they're actually disrupting the marketplace because they actually love their job, unlike a lot of folks who don't want to do more menial work. So profound story.
If that doesn't give you a vision for discipleship and what it can look like in everyday life, I'm not sure what can. That,
It's worth fighting
yes,
for.
certainly. 100%. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on here onto the podcast, the Visionary Discipleship Podcast, and sharing with us. This was a great episode. So much meat in here. Audience listeners, I hope that you found this very helpful. And as we say every episode, we're not here to answer all your questions, but to spark, start, and spur on some good thought trail down some pathways that maybe you haven't been. And I hope that did this for you, and you find some value in what Brian has shared with the different resources and what they do with Disciples Made, and just the mentality and the approach. I hope it just broke through some serious barriers maybe that you didn't know existed even in your own mind in the discipleship making process to see people live fully for Christ. So Brian, if people wanted to learn more about you and Disciples Made, where should they go? Where can you point them to?
Two ways. If you're kind of a church leader and you want to know kind of resources we provide to start making all these shifts or whatnot, go to disciplesmade.com, and it's all right there. What you'll see in there, and this is for anyone and everyone else, is the Fully Alive by Disciples Made app. You can go to the Google Store or the Apple Store, just Fully Alive by Disciples Made, and you can download that. The app's for free. There's a lot of free stuff in there, like the entire explore and develop processes. All that's free. Podcasts, blogs, articles, assessments, everything is free. It's only when you start leading those influence level cohorts that you get to a paywall. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that if you reach out to us from the website.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Brian, and audience and listeners. We will have the links for that in the episode show notes for you to be able to find easy. For, again, disciplesmade.com, and we'll have the app link there. You can tap that and click that and get access to get that app down on your phone and go learn more at their website. Reach out to Brian and their team about how they can help you more with this exact thing. Well, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Visionary Discipleship Podcast. My name's Adam, your host. You all have a great rest of your day.